Okay, welcome back. For those who are here, welcome again. And for those who haven't joined us, welcome to the Indigenous Research Center Symposium. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Jajage, Montreal. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities to examine research questions and projects in development across the university. We are running today's event as a live stream to YouTube and a Zoom meeting. So for those who are online on Zoom, we welcome your comments and questions with a raised hand or via the chat. And for those in the space, we welcome your comments and questions. And if you'd like to participate, we'll just have a Q&A session afterwards, and we'll make sure to get a microphone to you. So now we'll just get started with the third panel of today. So I'm going to introduce Research Coordinator for the Indigenous Research Center, Hanss Lujan Torres. Welcome.
Yay! Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Hanss Lujan Torres. I'm from Cusco, Peru, with Quechua ancestry, and I'm the Research Coordinator for the Indigenous Features Research Center. We're so pleased to have you all here, and I'm so pleased to be here with Morningstar, who's joining us remotely, and Racine, two incredible researchers that we're so lucky to have here at Concordia. When we first were thinking about the symposium, we thought, oh, let's find a way to bring these two folks together, because I think there's so many interesting intersections in their research, which is going to result in this conversation about Indigenous video games and research creation. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then they'll each do a presentation on their work. And then we're going to have a little conversation just about all these different things, and then we'll open up the floor for a Q&A. So maybe we'll start with Morningstar. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Morningstar. I'm from USG, Mississippi specifically, and I'm also a mother of two. I'm in my first year in my master's, second semester in communications media studies. So yeah, I'm still in the very initial stages of my research, but that's me. So hello.
Perfect. And Morningstar, do you want to get your presentation set up?
Yeah, it's going to be the Fourth Space that's going to post it up, and I'll tell them when to go next.
Yay.
Oh, am I presenting right away, or am I letting Van introduce herself too?
I guess we'll let you take the floor.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm from USG, and what I want to look into in my research is land as teacher in virtual worlds, and specifically the EU perspective on gaming, relationality, and digital environments. So I posted a few keywords there to show people like the type of things I'm looking into and how I'm relating all this to my studies. You can go to the next one, please. So I wanted to start off on where this idea kind of began. It all started when I was an undergrad student at Concordia, and I took this video game course because I thought it was really cool. And it was video games and as theory, where I got to learn about modernity. And I noticed that we were put into different roles, and we get to choose if we want to be in groups or not. So one of the roles that I chose was to be a flâneur. A flâneur is somebody who is kind of idle within the game. So they're just kind of observing society as it goes on. So I initially wasn't with the group. I was by myself the whole time. But I noticed within this role, I was able to enact a certain type of gameplay that I was kind of learned when interacting with the environment. So my people are more nomadic. And so I learned how to engage with the environment in a more nomadic way. And as a flâneur, I had to go observe all of the groups that were separate. So I was kind of traveling along, using the environment and putting things back. I was able to reenact the ways that my people have taught me to engage with the environment. And one of the ways of doing that too is when I would stay at other people's homes within the games, because I had to go from team to team, there's no reason why I should build my own house. I would give things back. I would give things in appreciation, like a gift or something, to thank them for letting me stay there and to stay safe overnight. And yeah, so that was the initial like gameplay. But then I noticed as I was playing the game, by observing my method of play and everyone else's, I realized that Minecraft was a really great platform for people to be able to build a society, because it really gives off that terra nullius, where nothing is there before, and they can just kind of build off of the resources they extract. So within that game, I was witnessing modernity in Minecraft, and the pivotal point within this witnessing of other groups building their own little villages and in terms of society is industrialization. And I guess from watching a ground of nothing turn into this process of industrialization and automation, I realized, wow, so when you go into this type of space that has all of these resources to the will of people, and they can do whatever they want with however much they want with no consequence, Minecraft really does give a really great platform for that. And I remember when I was playing with a friend on this server, he was a concrete pourer. And he was a very important person, because in order to make concrete blocks in the game, he had to pour it for a certain amount of time, and it had to be very perfect. And because he was able to do that, it was a skill he did, and everyone relied on him. And it was like a community, type of skill that he was able to give off to everybody. So everyone was working together in that moment. But then when we saw industrialization happening and automation, he wasn't needed. And that changes his social world, because he was just kind of, left to the side in that moment. So then when I was seeing these things happen, this is, into my perspective, the opposite of what community means in villages, and how we but how we, gather resources within the environment. So then I was like, oh, Minecraft as a video game is an amazing platform to understand through play. Because I was learning then, this is what modernity is, industrializing, urbanization, and all that type of things. Next slide, please. And sorry, everybody, I know that I kind of ramble. I'm a little nervous, but I thank you for your patience with me. So then I kind of went into the thinking of what makes a game colonial. And then looking into it more, there's a lot of things, right? So I read a book by Jody Bird called Indigenomicon, and it came out very recently. And some of the points that I've taken from her text was that video game functions obviously is one of them. So if I take Minecraft as an example again, it's where procedural systems encode subtler colonial logic into their very structure. So you go into a world that is free reign. You go to a tree because you need it. You punch it, becomes a block. It's yours. That's it. There's no consequence. There's nothing, more to that. It's yours, and you can do whatever you want with it. Another way that games promote colonialistic structures is the euphemistic language. So it kind of changes the language for you to feel that this is natural, this is okay. And then it masks it into neutral play. You're also enacting a violence, but because within the world of Minecraft, and it gives off that platform for you to do this, it becomes a neutral play. So craft, gather resources, build settlements. It's just play, right? So there's no violence towards it. You don't feel like there's a violence toward it. Game mechanics reproduce racial hierarchies as well, where Indigenous people are often flattened into environments or have disappeared. So conquest becomes a right when you go into Minecraft. Even me as myself, when, for example, Minecraft came out in 2011, when I would join the game, I didn't think of what was there before. I just thought of there's nothing and I can do whatever I want. Terra nullius, right? And then when we go into the last things, all of these kind of trickle down into where consequences are non-existent. So kind of like how I mentioned before, the whole industrialization, gathering resources and extracting it as much as you want, however you want. There's no consequences. It requires no stewardship, and it's only based on the creativity of the player, how much they want to go for, how big can their dreams happen, and they could just do whatever they want. All those aspects are into the colonialistic structure of mindset I find when players interact with explorative games. But I also want to focus on why our environments within explorative video games consistently programmed to allow the enactment of colonial practices, encouraging players to conform to the structure of how the environment is perceived only for its resources and survivability. And then I feel like because they're able to enact this, it becomes internalized. Think of when you go into Minecraft when you go into Minecraft into the place, right? You're enacting all these colonial structures on how to interact with the environment because it's a platform that encourages it. And because you're encouraging it, you think that it's the only way to play. So when I was playing into that game as a Flanders, as I mentioned in the previous slide, I didn't always play like that. When Mojang came out first and I like started playing with my family and stuff like that, we did the whole thing where, you find a land that's survivable, that has a lot of resources you can use, and you build off of it. And you create this huge farm with as many cows as you can because you got to eat meat. And then one of the ways that we found success in the game is by mining as much diamonds as we could, and whoever had the most diamonds was essentially the most richest in the game, the most successful. So it made me feel like when I played as a younger person of myself in Minecraft, and because it was structured that way, it created me to switch from what I was taught and how to interact with the environment from my people into a colonialistic structure of this is how I interact with the environment here, because it allows me to, it encourages me to. And one of the really good quotes that I took from the book by Jody Bird is colonialism is a structure, not an event. So video games hold that structure, especially explorative video games, because that is all we've internalized, that's all we've known. And we can reenact that and make it more concrete within our system on how to communicate with the environment in that way. We can go to the next slide. So this is where my moment happens. We talk about that a lot in master studies, where there's a little, moment when you're going through this type of process of curating your thesis questions. And when I was going through that video games course that I was talking about earlier, I started thinking, why is it that I'm playing like this now? Because I'm a Flanders and it allows me to play that way, where I have to be nomadic and I have to travel. Well, what if we created a game where land is a teacher in a virtual world? And my hope with this idea is to build a prototype with decolonial possibilities, but through the EU perspective. And the reason why I'm focusing on EU perspective for this prototype is because I don't speak for all nations. So I'm only going to be building a prototype based on the practices that I've known and been taught by my people. So my hope is to kind of fill that gap where instead of land being an object, it becomes an active agent. And that is the perspective that we believe land is active and it has agency, and we need to communicate with it. It has its own spirit, its own being. And within my people, there's collective stewardship with families. So we're always working together to make sure the balance is kept within our land. Reciprocal relationship with the space. So we're making sure that reciprocity is there and that we honor those rules that we have for ourselves within that environment. Flourishing through the balance. If the whole balance is uneven, or if something is not flourishing within this relationship, then that's something that has to be, taken care of. It has to get us to think on ways that we can make sure that everything is flourishing and the interconnected and connection with land and each other, to make sure that land is not just like a subcategory of our whole epistemologies, but that it's like the center and the core. One of the things that inspired this idea, especially with the platform Minecraft that I keep referring to because it's such a popular game and everybody knows it and probably has tried to do colonialistic structure, mechanics, gameplay within that platform, is that this was inspired by Manitou Abiaki. So they used the Minecraft platform to get people to sign on and connect with Indigenous elders and to learn about Indigenous traditional methods on how to interact with land. And I got that inspired, but it's still, when you're playing in that server, it's a conscious thought to be aware of what you're doing within the environment. But what I want to do, and drawing from Leanne Simpson's Land as Pedagogy, where she talks about land being a teacher as well, I want to take those ideas, put it into a prototype where land has agency. So an environment becomes a relational subject, not exploitable object. I want to challenge that mindset. So I mentioned earlier that when I played Minecraft, I had to switch my mind to a more colonial structure where I can do whatever I want, have the freedom, no consequences, and compete with my family on getting the most diamonds to be successful within the game. But I want to do the structure where you can change environment to be subjective, to have agency, to respond to you, where players will have to learn how to engage with the environment and listen to it in order to survive, in order to live, to understand the ecosystem around. and where games can become spaces for cultural transmission to uphold Indigenous peoples' epistemologies, ideologies, everything that they think of the environment is in their beliefs. And so I wrote reflections on how you view land, just because, again, I'm going to try to represent my people's beliefs the best I can that have been taught to me. And so my hope with this is that it gets people who have this internalized colonial structure on how to interact with land to force them to perhaps do that mind switch the other way. Where when they jump into that space, oh, I can't just do whatever I want. I can't go punch a tree and extract the blocks to use to make a house. I have to figure out how I can honor the environment, to use the resources, and to continue that conversation. And then I wrote in the words, by making land an active participant that decides whether to help the player, where games could enact kinship and reciprocity by transmitting players from owners into stewards, where resources can't be used unless actual reciprocity and conversation with the environment is agreed on terms founded on relationality. So I'm hoping that I can create a prototype with that idea in mind, where people come in and they can't just use whatever they want and do whatever they want for the will of creativity. They really have to learn how to engage with the environment and understand it and learn from it. And then in hopes to make this game a more like communal type thing where there could be more than one player, each person has to learn about the environment in a different way, communicate that with each other. Because to survive doesn't mean you're an individual doing whatever you want in a space that lets you explore it, but now you have to work with other people to survive and learn the relationality that you must have with this environment. Now we can go to the next one. Yeah, so my hope into creating this prototype, and again, I'm still in the initial stages, so this is all the theory, right? But I'm hoping in the next year to create this prototype is to represent the internalized beliefs of land and the importance within our I can't say it, but it's there on the screen, systems. And I'm hoping in the future that because I'm making this for my people, that this can perhaps become an adaptable platform, prototype that other nations can use to represent in how they engage with environment or how environment would react. That it doesn't become just how my belief system of land reacts to me, but perhaps other nations across Canada. Yeah, and I think one of the things that keeps me driving with this idea is another quote by Jody Bird from the book Indigenomicon, is that video games can take our people to places normally unreachable so that we may continue to engage with traditional teachings located in these sites. Sorry, the screen is small. So I'm hoping that not only is it a type of cultural transmission to enact how my people believe we interact with environment within a digital space, but I hope that it can reach other people to experience this and understand that when I play other people's explorative games with environments, I have to switch my mindset. Is that something that I can do for people to experience the Indigenous perspective of how we see land and environment within our lives and when we come in contact with it? But yeah, that's my presentation, and I hope I was able to articulate well. I know I was going fast, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Morningstar. Yeah. So many of those aha moments that you mentioned. Next up is Van.
So, hi, I'm Van. You can put to the next slide. I'll quickly introduce myself. Oh, I do have a remote control, never mind. So, hi, I'm Van. I'm an Anishinaabe from Beaver House First Nation. And in terms of my positionality, I want to mention that I grew up in the suburbs and currently live here in Montreal. I think it's important to make that distinction, especially as it relates to the content of my research. And yeah, so a brief about me. I graduated from McGill University in a Bachelor's of Linguistics. I started off not necessarily in game development or even really thinking about game development, and yet I found myself here. But in addition to linguistics, I'm also a beadworker, and I like to incorporate both contemporary beadwork and also just like the things I learn in technology and new medias, and I like to combine the two together. So yeah, this is an example of the work. These are spectrograms of my parents saying I love you in their first languages, and making a wampum belt being a treaty from my end as a response to it. So, I'm reaching towards the end of my master's, so my research question has kind of fallen towards in what ways can linguistic and cultural representations of Zagadewan inform Indigenous futurisms in video games. So I like to look at the concept of love, so Zagadewan, and I'll give a bit of a linguistics lesson here, but we can kind of break down this word into different pieces, and it kind of helps us conceptualize what it means. So don't worry, there's going to be another slide to explain. So we have zagi, which is the verb for treasure, and that's going to be third person imperative, and it's also a transitive verb. So in Anishinaabe, a transitive verb is kind of like two objects are can take the action. So it's also animate, so it has, that's its Anishinaabe gender, but it also implies that it has spirit. We also have this kind of colon, which is a marker for causation, so that something is causing something to happen. And idi kind of is a piece of the word that signals reciprocity, and when is the nominalization. It's turning it into a concept. So we're having like, so in a bit easier way to see it, Zagadewan, when you translate it, it's not just love. That's a very broad translation of it. It's actually, when we're looking at all these pieces and putting it together, it's a treasuring that you're causing to someone or something in a reciprocal manner. And it's the concept of that. So that's the teaching of love. And so now I'm just going to quickly talk about game making as research methodology with the idea of love in mind. So there's a couple aspects to consider and a lot that I've had to go throughout my master's. So that's the primary thing being environment, we have storytelling, and also player interaction. So environments, when we are playing video games, that's the first thing that we see when we're when we enter the world. It's going to give us our first visualization. It's going to inform us of certain areas. So what are these environments actually telling us? And what emotions do we get when we're exploring these digital worlds? So taking a look at the previous history of video games and Indigenous peoples in it, we can go back to the Oregon Trail, which is 1971. And I put this quote beside it: the Colorado Plateau was one of the last areas in the United States to be developed economically. Before the 1880s, it was virtually empty except for Indians. And notice that this quote is from 1972. So this idea of the Oregon Trail kind of giving us these images of empty spaces, kind of very racialized stereotypes of what we're supposed to look like and act like, as well as in the game itself, you're often attacked by a group of natives, or they're kind of represented more as an obstacle for you, the pioneer, the colonizer, to get to Oregon. So paired with this quote, it kind of just shows this idea, especially in the 70s, of what the land looks like. So we're looking at the kind of the first representations, not just in natives in video games, but also we're seeing representations of land in video games. So it's becoming less of a environment that we drop ourselves into, but more of a being that we're interacting with, right? So then we can also look at other games. So this is Stardew Valley, and we can kind of see this idyllic pastoral game with a really soft art, but we also see that the point of the game is to farm the land. And if anyone here has played Stardew Valley, you can farm quite a bit of the land. In fact, you can do a lot of changes to it. So we're kind of seeing, again, perhaps packaged a little more softly, but we still see this kind of extraction pattern that's happening. And also in Pokemon, again, we're kind of, our interactions with the land here is that, you know, you start the game, you're trying to find something in the, you want to leave town, and Oak stops you, telling you it's too unsafe to go out. So what do we see? Oh, sorry. And then our final one, let's jump a little bit further into the future, into cyberpunk. This is Cyberpunk 2077, and this is a scene from it. So we're seeing we actually don't see any land at all in this point, right? So we see a lot of metal structures. We barely see the sky. There's litter on the ground. So in different environments, we have different interpretations of the land. And what this shows is that land is often represented as a profitable and hostile body in video games. So my game, and kind of looking at research and environments, something that came out to me was the Malarctic mine. So this is a mine that's about maybe an hour and a half from my res, from Beaver House First Nation, and it's one of the largest open pit gold mines in North America, in Canada specifically. And it's set to close in 2039. So what are we supposed to do with this giant pit in the ground, right? How can we reimagine these scars in the earth? And I kind of wanted to explore futures of these sites through video games. So I think the next one is going to be a video. I recommend to pay attention to it. It is a 7-second video, and I will not repeat it. But this is what the Malarctic town is, and it'll just show you kind of going back to the question of earlier is, what does this make you feel? So we're seeing that a lot of when you're at the mine itself, so that video is taken by me, when we're at that mine itself, you kind of, when you get there, it's this huge feeling of dread, right? Like it's really hard to imagine, it's very difficult to imagine size, for example, because this is a mine. So all the trucks that you see that are really tiny, well, if we know the size of a mining truck, like they're massive, but they look so small. So it feels like, in a way, you're looking at something so small and it makes you feel a lot smaller. But kind of, my research has kind of been leading towards what I've been calling colonial landmarks. So yeah, these points of extraction are transformed into these colonial landmarks, and they're leaving physical memories of extractive and unforgiving processes that render it uninhabitable. So kind of, we're seeing this visualization of land, and we're also seeing how it's becoming sources of extraction and wastelanding. So this is a concept by Tracy Voiles, but wastelanding is when it's the colonial act of turning land dispossession mixed in with extraction and leaving these places completely wastelanded. So we can't build new things on it. We can't, because the ground is so destroyed by chemical processes, for example. So we see this a lot in Navajo mines, when they were mining radium. So a lot of miners at the time and a lot of indigenous communities, especially the Navajo Nation, have a lot of higher rates of cancer now because of the radium mining that was during World War II. So looking at the environment, and something that I've wanted to explore is the genre of cyberpunk. So in these stories of cyberpunk, it's a genre that's often rooted in the underdog. So we see a lot of the story of people who don't necessarily live in the high rises, but they are the ones who are on the ground. And I chose cyberpunk because it's the genre itself is a continuation of this kind of concept of extraction and profitability. And I wanted to look at how Indigenous knowledges play into these dystopic futures and what it can change within the genre of cyberpunk. So when we look at the imagery of cyberpunk, we often see we have like a lot of metals, we have a lot of reusability, especially in the underdog section of like cyberpunk. We have people who are learning how to be resourceful with the excess of tech, the excess of metals. So I think there's a lot of similarities in how Indigenous communities are quite adept at doing that kind of work of reusing and having to maintain snowmobiles, for example, or making things new with materials that perhaps aren't as traditional. So sweat lodges, for example, it can be a tarp, right? Versus what it was traditionally, like the traditional builds of a sweat lodge. So I think cyberpunk and Indigenous knowledges have an interesting way to have a conversation with each other, right? It's a very gritty, it's dark, it's very artificial. You have so much concrete that it's difficult to hear the spirits underneath in the ground. So how do we amend? How do we fix these relationships? And how can acts of reciprocity and acts of love mend that strained relationship with the land? So in building a video game and trying to get these initial ideas that are just about environment, actually informs a lot about how we engage with the world today, and also how we can think about futures within cities, specifically, because like I mentioned before, I didn't grow up on my reserve. I grew up in the suburbs, and now I live in the city. So representations of urban Indigenous life isn't something that I've necessarily seen a lot in recent media. So it's definitely also a personal way of trying to find ways to see myself in new media as well. So another example of kind of thinking through how we do in the environment. So this is my grandmother's cabin. And for Beaver House, this style of cabin is the cabin that you see the most. So Beaver House First Nation doesn't have roads, it doesn't have electricity. It's only accessible by boat or ski-doo in the winter. So I kind of wanted to reimagine these pieces, this iconography, I guess you could call it, of Beaver House within cyberpunk to kind of bring that familiarity, especially as it's set in the Malarctic mine. So we have a little cyberpunk version of my grandma's cabin as part of it. And yeah, it's just a fun way to explore how we can bring traditional, or maybe not necessarily traditional, but new tradition or contemporary Indigenous life into and propel it even further into the future. So yeah, just to close it off. So games, specifically role-playing games, create these forms of interactivity that rely on how the player progresses through the game, right? In creating this game, my research explores the storytelling, and specifically environmental storytelling that rewards reciprocity instead of production. So when we're looking at, I didn't talk too much about my games, I kind of skipped over that, but yeah, so especially when we're looking at environment and land within video games, I think it's really important for us to have those interesting interactions of the player with the environment, and that will help us it'll help us kind of explore more of the storytelling behind that world that you're being immersed in. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening.
Oh, wow. Thank you both for these really rich and layered presentations. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, like there's so many interesting intersections, but also different perspectives on video games and research creation. Morningstar, you're doing your MA in communications, and Van, you're doing your MA in the Indie program. You're towards the end of it, and Morningstar is just beginning. But yeah, also just these other ideas of world building, virtual environments, community engagement, and engaging with the land. But one thing that I noticed is just this idea of futures that you're both kind of exploring, maybe in different ways. Morningstar, I don't want to project and say that maybe your view is a bit more utopic, but I'll let you kind of speak more on that, where you're engaging with this more ecological environment, and this ideal way of engaging with the land, or a more respectful way of engaging with the land. And Van, you're looking at more dystopic and really embracing these cyberpunk and dystopic approaches. We talked a little bit about dystopia and futures in the previous panel, the First People Studies panel, where it's this idea of just tracing, what's happening in the world right now and seeing how it's going to unfold. But maybe I'm curious to see if you can maybe speak on those concepts. Do you subscribe to them? Are they something that you see is already happening? Is it a cautionary tale? Is it something you're actively working towards? This idea of utopia and dystopia in the framework of your games.
I guess I'll take a first shot at it. So yeah, I focus a lot on dystopians, specifically within cyberpunk. I think the genre itself has changed a lot over the years. So when we think about, and I think it's also dependent generationally.
Yeah.
So older generations who are familiar with cyberpunk will first know it as a literary genre, not necessarily an online subculture, in the way that I grew up with cyberpunk, which is growing up on the internet. The genre itself, the literary genre is pre-internet. So this is coming from like a group of writers who kind of made these predictions about new cyberspaces, and then my generation is the one who's are actually engaging within these cyberspaces. So there's that aspect to it, and then also it becoming a subculture and being a way that I was able to express myself online. So my engagement with the genre itself doesn't necessarily come from kind of like this Blade Runner dystopia. It's coming from more of the visuals and kind of online environments that they had once imagined. That is no longer imagined, it's real now. And also, I think cyberpunk lends itself to having conversations about extraction and production, because that's what the genre is critiquing at the same time. So I think it's interesting to see how looking at post-mining industry, as well as this post or overconsumption society and cities kind of interact with each other. And yeah, I think also looking at cities, I think personally I really love the visuals of cyberpunk. I like the neon lights and like these concepts, like the colors and the color schemes also I think are relatable as well, right? Like there's a lot of neons in cyberpunk, and when we look at powwow dancing, for example, it's very colorful. And so I think there's ways that Indigenous knowledges can seep into it, and even though it's dystopic, I also think there's a lot of elements from cyberpunk genre that we are seeing already today. For example, internet.
Yeah. Thanks. Morningstar, how about you? Oh,
I was so. Oh, you hear me now?
You're good. Yes.
Okay. Could you repeat the question? I was just so.
Oh, yeah. Just
fired.
I guess thinking about futures from a utopic or dystopic lens. Do you subscribe to either of those for your game? Yeah. How do you envision this sort of more respectful approach to the land through video games?
Yeah, um, that's a good question, actually. I'm trying to see if I can frame it in either one, and I don't know if perhaps the idea that I have fits like very well in either, just because what I'm hoping to do is challenge the mindset that was already set up in the past, right? And I don't think it's to promote this type of utopia where we think that it's paradise in the end, but that it's more of a relationality thing with environment where I hope that it can challenge that mindset so that people are like, what is my relationality with environment? It's kind of like taking away from Jason Lewis's writing on making kin with machines. It's what's my relationship with the machine? So what's my relationship with environment? I guess my hope is that this would change the future for a better. So maybe it does fit more into the utopia rather than dystopia. But I guess where I'm kind of in the middle in the sense of like, you know, what we imagine right now as a future is it represents dystopia where we think things are just going to crash and burn, and the only way to combat colonialism and capitalism is if everything is destroyed, right? The end of the world, a very crisis mentality. But I guess where this kind of fits in is just to like let's not think ahead into that yet, and let's see if you can change how you interact with the environment now if you were to start over and come into that place, and what kind of changes would that be? And it's not perfect, which is why I feel like it could be utopian, but at the same time not, because relationality is not perfect. It's a fluid thing. So yeah, I hope that answers it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, just breaking this binary, right? And I mean, there's something to be said about Indigenous and racialized folks having lived through the end of the world multiple times. It's not something in the future. It's something that has been experienced and survived in different realities and occasions. So while we're deconstructing things, I mean, we talked a little bit earlier just about video games, indigenous video games, as being framed oftentimes as educational. There's something to learn from them. And I'm curious, where do you stand with that framing, again, of your work? Is it something you work against? Is it a concern of yours? Because I think there's something to be said about using video games as an intergenerational tool. Yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts on framing your games as a learning tool.
Yeah, I'm usually for the context of the games I'm making for my research creation. I'm always hesitant to let my games be called educational, because they're not made with the intent to teach anything, actually. They're made with the intent to be enjoyed, and that comes from a conversation I had with my uncle at Beaver House, and me asking him like what it was like living actually on the settlement, because most people don't live on the settlement anymore because it's a bit difficult in terms of access to road and services. So what he said was we were just surviving. And that really made me think about what the difference between surviving and existing. And so my games are kind of made with the intent of just people living, people existing. So I don't think that necessarily teaches anyone anything, but I think the games naturally inform you of things. And I think there's space to have educational games, but again, mine is not necessarily teaching anything explicitly, but rather just creating conversation around a different version of cyberpunk. Because I think to have Indigenous games marked as education puts us further into that box and kind of highlights the prominence or Western, like kind of pushes this Western agenda of one game being very specific to a certain culture. And also in video games in general, I feel we see a lot of we don't see a lot of Japanese RPGs, for example, be put in as educational, despite them still teaching you things within the environment. So for me, I don't see why Indigenous games can't be treated as another like indie game.
Yeah, this idea of like expecting this holistic or, you know, fully fledged understanding or knowledge. Yeah. Morningstar, do you have any thoughts on this idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I wasn't doing this for educational intent. It was just to challenge a mindset, to challenge my own mindset when I interact with, with sportive games. Like, why do I conform to their structure? And why not just make a game where they have to conform into the structure of Indigenous ways of thinking with environment? Um, and although I wouldn't label it as educational, I feel like it would be used as an educational tool, perhaps for cultural transmission, especially with children. One of the things that motivate me to create this prototype is that my son loves video games. And there was a time when he was little and he would play Minecraft because, TNT explosions, you do a bunch of things on there and he loves that. And then I'm thinking, what if I made a game where he's kind of learning about my culture through that game, interacting within a digital environment? Then it becomes a sort of educational tool, but not in the, westernized sense, but more in a sense of how would I teach my child to interact with the environment on his own? Because unfortunately, we live in an urban area and I don't have access to my lands often because, I'm here for education and he works with me. So I think it can be used as an educational tool, but not to also be for enjoyment for people to go in there themselves and see how they would want to play with it. Yeah.
I'll ask one more question before we open it up for the audience, but kind of following this idea of education, you're both bringing your research into this academic field, communications and the indie program. And I'm just curious if you can speak about those experiences of trying to create video games here at Concordia, maybe having the type of support, because also there's the technical support, but also, the theoretical ones. If maybe you can, and you're, again, in different phases of your research right now. So how are things going? How are you finding this big undertaking? You're creating these really beautiful and, again, multi-layered games and projects. Yeah, how is that going so far?
Yeah, so it's going good, I hope. Yeah, as part of the indie program, I think something that is a bit unique with the program is not having a cohort. So that definitely changes the way support systems are kind of structured into my program. So I was very lucky that my supervisor, Jason Lewis, runs AppTech, so I was able to use kind of my position as the skins coordinator at Aboriginal Territories in Cyberspace as a way of kind of my pseudo cohort. So I'm able to kind of bounce ideas off of other colleagues who are also in digital arts, who are in video game development, and who are also Indigenous. So for me, it was a lot easier to work that way because, yeah, not having a cohort or having kind of like that structure that many other programs do makes it a lot more individualized. So yeah, I think that was definitely something that was new for me to navigate coming from a linguistics program, which is extremely structured and has to be done a certain way. So that was definitely a huge adjustment for me and trying to figure out where I fit within the university. Sometimes sometimes I don't feel like a student sometimes, but I am. So that was definitely something to me that stood out.
Morningstar, how about you?
Yeah, so actually, my experience is kind of the opposite to Vance. So I graduated in English Lit, where there's like freedom of thought, and you're engaging with literature, and you're writing analysis and stuff like that. And I felt like I have the freedom to express exactly my critiques, my analysis of stuff, And then going into the communications program, there's more structure. It's not to say that it's very rigid, but I feel like I'm being, confronted with a lot of these works that talk about the foundations of communications and theories and thoughts and stuff like that from writers way back when that I don't remember the names or when these pieces were written, where it kind of gets me into this rigid moment of like, okay, does my research question fit in here? Or how much room can I express my thought within my research? And another thing that I find happens a lot is I get a little stuck because I do have a cohort and they're very lovely people. And there's one Indigenous person in my cohort, which I'm really psyched about. But we're not researching the same thing exactly. So sometimes when I'm trying to find people to talk my idea with, I get a lot like, that's really cool, but there's not as much engagement as I would hope or wish. So I find myself always jumping from like tag to IFRC and then talking to friends about it, which I'm very thankful for all my friends at the OSC who's heard my idea, or even other Indigenous students that I meet, offhand somewhere who I tell my idea to, and they're like, oh my gosh, why did you try this? Have you tried this? And then when I take all those ideas and inspirations, I kind of fall back onto the, oh yes, what is a research question? How do I restructure it to fit into, a way that we need to structure research questions in the communications department? So I'm in the research creation stream, so there's a lot more room there, but I often feel a little anxious because I'm like, how far can I go with this? And then also I need to validate my work. And what's sad about that is there's not a lot of EU scholarly works out there to kind of validate all of these thinkings and expressions that I have about the work that I want to do. It's going to be a lot of ethnographies where I'm going to communicate with people and try to get all of that to be like, this is what I'm creating and why, and here's all the proof of why I'm creating this. And so I feel like that's where the rigid comes at me, and I feel a little like, how do I budge? But I also have the freedom to move, but I have to move in a way that the communications department would like me to. Um, but from a personal experience as an Indigenous person within this department, I have very great support. So there's people who I can talk to about like, can I do this way? And they'll give me alternatives and stuff like that. So I can say that this department is very supportive and open. But it is hard to find, people who can understand exactly what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe we'll open up the floor for questions if anyone has any questions. There's a microphone around, I believe.
Yeah, so for the people online, you can raise your hand and we'll call you to unmute or just write them into the chat. And for people in the space, just raise your hand and I will give you this mic. We have one here.
Hi, thanks for amazing, interesting talks, both of you. I'm also one of Jason's master's students in Indy, so I feel your pain about having no cohort. Although AbTech and Skins is, of course, like a fantastic cohort, as is TAG. This might be a weird question, but I was actually thinking, because both of you described, as I understood it, kind of this experience of going from like very structured to less structured in terms of like what you, or the other way around, in terms of like what you studied. And I was wondering, kind of building off the very first slide you showed, or maybe the second, of the word for love and breaking it down into those like this pieces, I don't know what they're called. And I was trying to think of what this is. I guess this is less a statement, less a question, more of a statement. But I'm actually curious how you guys bridge that gap. I was thinking, like, what in that case, what lies between like the word and then the visuals that you're showing. And the only thing that I really could think of was like kind of the field of narratology, and I'm thinking specifically of Eugene Dorfman's idea of the narreme, which is the smallest it's like the smallest narrative component. For example, like the sun sets, like that's a narrative piece that only has 3 words in it, or like the lover's part, right? Both of those contain an entire narrative structure within them, but they're at the most simple level. That's just, I guess, an example of one way to bridge those expanses between unstructured and structured. So I'm just curious, if this isn't too an abstract question, how you guys both have gone about doing that from these opposite directions, given that you both have backgrounds in things that are either much less structured or much more structured. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think in terms of, yeah, making the leap between the kind of like this theoretical linguistics and game development, both like narratively and technically, I think for, at least from my perspective in linguistics, when we're looking at kind of the morpheme breakdown of Zagadewin and looking at syntax more broadly, it's actually, there's quite a few similarities in how Anishinaabe as a language functions as a verb-based language, and computer language, which is also very verb-based, I guess. It would be kind of the human interpretation of it. So in terms of making the leap there, that's kind of where I started thinking about love as more of a function and possible game mechanic, while still trying to hold on to the actual meaning of that word and what it means, what it actually means for us to trigger that function in a game, like kind of as a play on words of living in the language. But in terms of like the stylistic aspects of making the leap from like very structured linguistics to theoretical linguistics, I should add, to something extremely creative, I think there also is kind of loosely there, but as a beadwork artist, I actually rely a lot on pixel art for beadwork patterns. Because the beads are so small and they're kind of square, it actually works really well. So for me, it's kind of, how can I bring the knowledges that I possess into this kind of new field for me? I wasn't really expecting to go into video game development, but then, you know, I was asked like, why don't you just make a video game? And I was like, yeah, why not? And that's how I kind of wound up here. So yeah, for me, it was kind of those, taking that more abstractly, and I think it helped me a lot in navigating kind of the perspectives I want to touch on in my research. Yeah.
Trying to rephrase the question. So you were saying like how I went from like a less structured to a more structured. Is that correct? Is-
Oh, oh, you have to use the mic.
sorry, I can't hear.
What, if anything, was kind of in between those two poles? Or how did you kind of like conceptualize or get from one to the other?
Mhm.
That's
Yeah, okay, I think I got it. I don't feel like I have a great answer for that because I've never really thought about it, but I mean, you know, some introspection is fun. But I think what really helped is that when I was in the English lit department, you know, it's often just analyzing. So it's like removing yourself. But then you have the freedom of thinking, like you can express yourself as you're analyzing these things. So I think what really helped me is that, you know, within that video games course, I was able to analyze other people and how they're playing and then write about it. I had the freedom to express my experience within that course because as a fun nerd, you're idling around. And that was like the big point where I'm like, hey, I want to do something about this. And then it was suggested to me that I try research creation in the communications department because, like, you can make a game there and there's going to be people there who can help you. And that's what I think I needed was a structure, but I didn't realize how much of a structure, you know, it was. But I think the thing that is helping me a lot, like that's bridging me in that is I don't know if you got, I read recently about tacit knowledges. So it's like, I know something, but I don't know how I know. So when it came to that video games where I was playing and then I was, you know, enacting the way that my people taught me how to be in environment and stuff like that. Like, I know this, but I don't know exactly why. But going into this more structured department, it's helping me to uncover that so that I can kind of talk about that within that space and kind of validate that type of research and why I'm expressing all this. One thing that happened consistently in my undergrad is I would talk about my idea of this game, this prototype. It wasn't yet established, but I was like kind of talking about it. And then I had a friend ask me, why? Like, what's valid about this? Why would someone want to play it? And I just couldn't uncover why. So I think what helped me jumping into this, the bridge, is that I had something inside me that I couldn't express or like structure. But now that I'm in this program, people are kind of like digging into me about it. And then I'm able to restructure it and then put it in the game and to find that voice of why I want to create this prototype. I don't know if that answers that well. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking so far.
It's wonderful. Thank you. I feel like we're a little out of time. One more question? Okay. Yes.
Thank you very much for these presentations. I'm not sure I've ever played a video game. They were like so long ago. But I watch kids in the library playing video games. And so that's something I want to try. But my question to you as designers of games, as people designing a game or thinking of designing games, do you ever want to put yourself in the video game? Like, you know, film directors put themselves in the film. Could you be a character in your own game, in your own narrative? And also, are there language-based Indigenous games like that? Like the language is in the land and is part of the environment, and language is very important.
Yeah, I think in terms of like the second half of that question of languages in the video game, I think Indigenous video games is still a very new process that's coming out, and yeah, there's quite a few games that are made in the language. There's a lot of games that are actually for language learning. Yeah, one of our colleagues, Gahandawaks Tusha, actually that's her company now. Is actually she produces Indigenous language learning games for Ganyangeha.
Revital software.
Revital software, yeah. As for the first half of the question, which was about inserting myself into games, I try not to do that because with the genre of RPGs, the player is the main character, right? So the main character that you're making, and I think it depends on the type of game you're playing, but in terms of, for example, Stardew Valley or kind of this Pokemon or like this style of RPG that I'm kind of engaging with, you have kind of like a set sprite and it is the player playing the game. So when you're playing the game, you can, like what I used to do as a kid, like I used to make up stories in my head all the time about when I was exploring the worlds, right? So there is an element of self-insert in it. But to make an actual character of myself, I don't know yet. But I mean, it's not uncommon in games. A lot of games do that. Zelda Breath of the Wild, one of their game developers for the game had died, and I think it's in the second game or the first game, but you actually run into a character that was in part of the map that the developer really admired, and so that character lived there, and it was actually named after the developer as a way to pay respects to them. So I think there's definitely ways to do it, but I think like on a basis, the player sort of self-inserts them as the main player of a game.
Like inserting yourself as a character within the game. I think what my focus is on explorative games. So there's not really like, it's not by character and it wouldn't be like storyline. It's more like you're interacting as you're exploring the world. And what I like about those games is that you're kind of entering in those games as yourself and that you're interacting with the environment on your own. So I think what I like about those games is that children, for games, like I see my children who play Minecraft, for example, enter themselves into the game with their own knowledge and how they're gonna interact with the environment. So I think if I were to create more games, that's how I'd like to keep it, because I want people to experience that within their own selves, within video games, and build up that experience of their own and not have to switch from their own character to, within a character within the game and observe what they're doing. I like that they can go in as themselves. For the second part of the question, it was, sorry, languages. Do you guys remember by chance?
Language learning games.
I mean, yeah. I mean, for language games, I don't really know much about that. I wasn't into language learning games. But one thing that perhaps the idea that I have for this prototype is that when people interact with an environment that doesn't have names, that they create names. So one example that I could give that I'm hoping would go into this Minecraft explorative game that I hope to prototype and build off of in mod and stuff is that so my people live on a land and we're called Mistissini, and Mistissini means big rock because there's this huge boulder there. That's how people can associate, the word with where the place is. And everyone knows Mississippi is big rock back home, and there's a story linked to it. So I'm hoping within this explorative game where you jump in and there's no name for any direction where you're going, you have to make a name to distinguish where that place is. And that is kind of like how the languages works back home, is that there's this description to tell you who this is or what this is or where this is. So I hope that kind of answers that question, but I think Ben answered that question really well.
Okay, well, thank you both for, again, your brilliance. Clap for them, yay. We're gonna take a little break just to reset for the next panel, but feel free to grab some coffee and some leftover pizza if you're hungry, and we'll be back shortly. Thank you.
I'll keep it nice, short, and sweet. Thank you to Hanss, Van, and Morningstar for leading this conversation. So we will be closing down the live stream, but people online, people in the space, will be transitioning to the next panel. So stretch your legs, grab a drink, grab a little bite, and we'll be there shortly. Thank you.